Routine welfare check unleashes unimaginable horror. The knock echoed in the empty hallway. A steady rhythm. No one answered. Officer Daniel turned the knob, his fingers slipping over the cold brass. It creaked open. Inside was still. Too still. The air was thick with dust. A single lamp flickered above, casting strange shadows on the walls. Daniel hesitated. His boots squeaked as he stepped inside. The apartment smelled of old paper and stale air. A faint scent of rotting wood lingered in the corners. He glanced around. Nothing seemed out of place. But the silence, it pressed against his chest. "Miss Miller?" He called out, his voice weak, uncertain. No response. Just the hum of the flickering lamp. He took another step, his eyes scanning the room. The couch was empty. The kitchen was bare. No sign of life. He felt uneasy. Something was wrong. The bathroom door stood ajar. He could see the dim outline of the shower curtain. A shiver ran down his spine. He moved closer. The floorboards creaked underfoot. "Miss Miller's?" This time his voice cracked. He pushed the door open. The room was cold. Unnaturally cold. The steam from a shower was still in the air. But the tub was dry. Empty. The mirror above the sink was fogged up. A message was written in the condensation. "Help me." His breath caught. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He wiped his hand across the mirror, clearing the fog. But the message remained. A creaking sound came from behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Just the empty bathroom. But the feeling of being watched, it was overwhelming. He reached for his radio. His fingers trembled. No signal. The air grew colder. The hairs on his neck prickled. And then he heard it. A low, drawn-out whisper. "Help me." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He turned, but no one was there. The whisper had come from inside the walls. His hand went to his gun. He moved cautiously, feeling his way along the walls. The whisper came again. Closer this time. "Help me, please." Daniel's breath hitched. His feet moved faster now. He had to find her. He had to get out. But the door to the apartment was locked. And the walls were closing in. He slammed his shoulder into the door. The wood rattled. It didn't budge. Panic surged through him. His mind raced. The whisper was louder now. Closer. He turned toward the kitchen. The window. Maybe he could break it. But his feet felt heavy. Like the floor was holding him down. The whisper. It was coming from the wall. Right behind him. He spun around, his breath shallow. His hand trembling. He placed it against the cold plaster. "Who's there?" His voice cracked. The wall shuddered. Something moved inside it. A soft thud. A scraping sound. His pulse quickened. His mouth went dry. Then, a low groan. A whispering voice, so close it sent chills through his spine. "Help me." The walls started to crack. A dark stain began to seep through the plaster. It spread slowly, like ink in water. Daniel backed away, his eyes wide. The room seemed to be shrinking. The air felt thick, suffocating. He reached for his radio again. No signal. The crack in the wall widened. It was like something was pushing from the other side. Something alive. The walls creaked. The floorboards groaned underfoot. Then, the unmistakable sound of fingers scraping the inside of the wall. He took a step back. Then another. His heart thudded. There was no way out. He turned toward the door again. This time, the handle twisted. But not by his hand. The door swung open on its own. Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat. The hallway beyond was pitch black. No one was there, except for the faint sound of breathing, coming from the dark. The whisper began again. Only now it was no longer a whisper. It was a voice, clear and demanding. "Help me, Daniel." He turned back to the apartment. The air grew colder. The walls impossibly close. His legs felt numb. His head was spinning. The voice that knew him. He stepped into the hallway. The door slammed shut behind him. The darkness swallowed him whole, his heart hammered in his chest. The darkness was suffocating. His footsteps echoed in the hallway. But there was no sign of the building's usual creaks. No sounds of life. Just the heavy silence. The cold air clung to his skin. He reached out, his fingers brushing the walls. The smooth surface felt wrong. Too smooth. The faint whisper lingered. "Help me." It wasn't from behind anymore. It was around him. 1,000 voices, all at once. He turned down the corridor, hoping to find something, anything. His flashlight flickered once, then died. The darkness thickened. His breath quickened. He fumbled for his radio. Nothing. His pulse raced, echoing in his ears. Every step he took felt heavier, like he was wading through water. The air was thick with a smell he couldn't place. Something rancid. Something decayed. Then he heard it. A distant dragging sound. A slow, deliberate scrape across the floor. Coming closer. Daniel spun around. Nothing. The hallway stretched out, endless and empty. The scraping grew louder. Closer. He rushed toward the stairs, his boots thudding on the cold concrete. But the further he ran, the darker it seemed to get. The air grew colder still. His vision blurred. The scraping sound morphed into something else. A wet slapping sound. And then, a low growl. He stopped dead in his tracks. The growl was too close now. The air shifted. The temperature dropped further. His breath turned to mist. Something moved in the darkness. It was large, hulking. It was breathing. In and out. Low, ragged. Daniel reached for his gun. His hand shook violently. The creature was right there. He could feel its presence. Its eyes, though unseen, burned into his skin. The whispering voices reached a crescendo. "Help me, Daniel." But now it was different. The voice had changed. It wasn't a plea anymore. It was an order. "Help me, or you'll die here too." Daniel took a step back. He could feel it now, the weight of the darkness pressing in. He was trapped, with nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. The creature's growl vibrated the floor beneath him. A low, deep rumble that shook his bones. His breath caught in his throat. And then, a clawed hand shot out of the darkness. The clawed hand shot out of the darkness, gripping his wrist with a force that made his bones crack. Chill that wasn't natural. Daniel gasped, the breath knocked out of him. The hand was cold, unnaturally cold, like it was made of stone. He tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, a sharp pressure cutting into his skin. The creature's presence loomed closer, its growl reverberating through the very walls. He could feel its breath on his face, hot and foul. With a surge of adrenaline, he twisted his body, his free hand reaching for his gun. But the weight of the darkness dragged him down. His vision blurred, the air thick with the smell of decay. The creature's growl became a low rumbling laughter, mocking him, taunting him. "Too slow," it whispered, its voice scraping against his mind. In that instant, Daniel felt it, the cold tendrils of fear, slithering inside him. The fear was alive. His fingers brushed against the gun holster, but he couldn't get a firm grip. The creature's claws dug deeper into his arm, drawing blood. "Help me, Daniel," it hissed, its voice now a twisted, guttural mockery. It wasn't just the thing behind him. No, the walls seemed to be alive now, the hallway itself groaning with hunger. He had to escape. The creature's claws scraped against the floor, a chilling sound that made Daniel's spine freeze. He stumbled, nearly losing his balance, his eyes darting wildly for an escape. But there was nothing, just endless darkness. The growl behind him grew louder, closer, and then the voice. That voice, twisted again. "Run, Daniel. Run while you can," it whispered in his ear. His pulse raced, his breath ragged. He could feel the presence just inches away, the coldness wrapping around him like a vice. His legs moved on their own. He dashed forward, his feet slapping against the hard floor. Every step felt heavier. The growl intensified, and then, the unmistakable sound of something charging. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't look back. He couldn't afford to. His fingers brushed against the doorframe at the end of the hallway. It was cracked open just enough for him to slip through. But as he reached for the door, Something grabbed him again. This time it was his ankle, a vice-like grip, pulling him to the ground. He screamed in pain, the sound echoing through the walls. He kicked, struggling to break free. His gun slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. The creature's breath was hot against his face. It growled, louder this time, almost a roar. With a final desperate lunge, Daniel tore himself free, his legs snapping out and connecting with the wall, propelling him forward. He slammed into the door, and it gave way just enough. He burst through, his body tumbling into the next room, the door slamming shut behind him. His lungs burned as he gasped for air. His hands were slick with sweat and blood. For a moment, it was quiet. The growls stopped. The whispers faded. But then, a sharp, cruel sound came from the other side of the door. A scraping. A scratching. The walls rattled again. The air grew thick. "Come back, Daniel." The voice whispered. It was low. It was hungry. And it was not done with him yet. The scratching grew louder. Closer. As if something was trying to claw its way through the walls. Daniel's heart raced. He stumbled to his feet, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his flashlight. It flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows on the room's cracked walls. The room was small, empty, bare except for a single, decaying chair in the corner. The air smelled stale, musty, like it hadn't been opened in years. The growl came again. Low. Relentless. He could feel the floor vibrating now, the walls groaning with pressure. The creature was close. His breathing quickened. His head was spinning. There was nowhere to run. No escape. The door was his only option. But the scratching, the relentless, tearing sound, told him it wouldn't hold for long. He turned to the window, but it was too high to reach. Too small. A faint flicker of movement caught his eye. In the corner of the room, the chair. It was shifting. At first it seemed like nothing, just the shadows playing tricks on his mind. But then he saw it clearly. The legs of the chair were dragging, creeping across the floor. His breath caught in his throat. The room was alive. The walls weren't just cracking now, they were breathing. A low, pulsing rhythm beneath the layers of plaster. The air thickened. And then, the whisper returned. Closer. More demanding. Help me, Daniel." He spun around, his eyes searching the room frantically. But there was no one there. Nothing but the chair, moving ever so slightly. Suddenly, a loud bang. The door shuddered. The walls cracked again. And the scratching, the clawing sound, came from every direction now. The room was closing in. Daniel's breath was shallow, his pulse hammering in his ears. The whispers grew louder. "You're mine now." The voice was deep. It was no longer pleading. It was commanding. Dark. The chair stopped moving. But something else shifted. The floor beneath him groaned. A crack spread from the center of the room, splitting the ground open. Daniel stumbled back, eyes wide, as the floor split open like a wound. From the crack, a shape began to emerge. Something alive. A twisted, malformed figure, its eyes black and hollow. It stepped forward, its feet sinking into the broken floor, dragging itself toward him. The whispering stopped. All that remained was the creature's labored breathing, its ragged, choking gasps for air. And then, with a voice that wasn't quite a voice at all, it said, "You shouldn't have come here, Daniel." Daniel froze. The air was thick with dread. The creature's presence pressed against him, its very essence suffocating. It moved closer, each dragging step making the ground tremble. Its form was a blur of shadows, distorted, as if it didn't belong to this world. The room seemed to warp around him, its edges bending, twisting, like the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. "Please," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. He backed away, his legs shaking, his body screaming to run. But there was nowhere to go. The walls were closing in. The ceiling was lowering, slowly, deliberately. The creature reached out. Its hand, no, its claw, like a shadow that stretched too far. Too late, it rasped, its voice crackling like dry leaves. Daniel's pulse raced. His mind raced. What was this thing? Why was it after him? His hands fumbled for his gun. But it was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos. The creature's mouth opened, but no words came. Instead, a wave of cold washed over him, a cold that pierced to his very bones. It was suffocating. It was consuming. The room was alive, its walls pulsating with a dark rhythm. The air was no longer breathable. It was poison, thick and choking. The claw reached for his throat, its jagged tip scraping his skin, drawing blood. Daniel gasped, his fingers desperate, clawing at the thing's arm. But it was too strong. A low, growling laugh escaped the creature. It was close now. Too close. Daniel could feel its breath on his face. Icy and foul. Don't you understand? The creature hissed, its voice like 1,000 whispers, echoing inside his skull. You're already part of this place. He couldn't breathe. His vision blurred. With the last of his strength, Daniel twisted his body, slamming his shoulder into the creature's chest. But it didn't budge. It didn't even flinch. Instead, the walls of the room responded. They closed in tighter, the crack in the floor widening, and the creature. It shifted, morphing, twisting in ways that no living thing should. Daniel's knees buckled. He fell to the floor, his hands clutching his throat, the air growing thinner with each passing second. The creature leaned down. Its black eyes filled his vision. And, in that moment, he understood. It wasn't after him. It wasn't trying to kill him. It was calling him home. As the room collapsed around him, as the darkness swallowed him whole, the creature's whisper became a roar. You are mine, Daniel. And the last thing he felt was the cold that consumed him, engulfed him. Until there was nothing left, the cold suffocated him. Each breath a struggle, a rasping fight for air that didn't come. His limbs felt heavy, numbed by an unnatural chill. The world around him shifted, fading, melting away like a bad dream. But then, a flicker of light, a small, distant glow, cutting through the overwhelming darkness. Daniel reached out. It was like reaching for the edge of reality itself. His hand touched something, smooth, cold, like glass. But it didn't shatter. It pulled him. He gasped, his eyes snapping open. For a split second, he thought he was back in the hallway, the apartment. But everything felt wrong. He was in a place that wasn't quite here. It was neither solid nor empty. A void suspended in time. The air was thick, heavy with whispers, with the remnants of things long forgotten. Daniel, the voice, that asterisk voice, came again, but this time it was clearer, closer. He turned. The shadows stretched and twisted, forming shapes he couldn't quite grasp. Figures that didn't move like humans. They crawled. They slithered. The whispers, they weren't voices anymore. They were thoughts. Strange, fragmented thoughts, pulsing with a rhythm of their own. You belong here now. We are part of you. You cannot escape. Daniel's heart hammered. His skin felt alive. 1,000 pinpricks of sensation everywhere. It was as though his very being was unraveling, piece by piece. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. The same creature. But this time, it was different. Its eyes were no longer hollow. They were filled with a sickening, glowing light. It grinned at him, a smile that stretched far too wide. Too many teeth. Welcome home, Daniel. Its voice was a mixture of 1,000 voices, suffocating and ancient. The space around him twisted, the shadows pulling tighter, pressing in from every side. There was nowhere left to run. No exit. The creature reached for him, its claws elongated and sharp, glinting in the pale, shifting light. Daniel didn't resist. There was no fight left in him. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The shadows closed around him, consuming his body, his soul. And in the last moments of consciousness, he realized the truth. He had never been meant to leave. This was where he was always meant to be, a part of the darkness, a part of the place. And as the world around him dissolved completely, the whispers returned, louder now, more certain. "You're one of us now." The whispers swirled around him, invasive, suffocating, pressing into his mind. They weren't just words anymore. They were memories. His memories. Faces blurred. Places long forgotten. A flash of his mother. Her voice calling his name. But it was distant. A memory from another life. His body felt like it was no longer his own. It was shifting, warping, melting into the darkness. As though the shadows were becoming him.
And he was becoming them.
A low, echoing hum filled the space. A sound like a distant chant, woven through the fabric of time itself. It was ancient. It was alive. "Daniel," the creature's voice whispered again, but this time it was inside him. Its words burrowing deep, scraping against the edges of his thoughts. "You're home now, Daniel. You'll never leave. You never could leave." He wanted to scream. He wanted to fight. But his body refused to move. His mouth refused to open. The walls around him pulsed, undulating with a sickening rhythm. The air was thick, almost viscous, as if it was alive, breathing in time with him. Suddenly, a vision flashed before his eyes. The apartment again. The door. The hallway. The warmth of the sun. The taste of air. Of freedom. And then it was gone. The creature loomed before him, its face now completely obscured, its form a mass of writhing shadows. The walls of the room stretched upward, as if to reach beyond the edges of existence itself. "You can't leave," it rasped. "But you don't want to, do you?" Daniel's mind screamed. No, he didn't belong here. He had to get out. He had to escape. But the walls tightened. The floor beneath him cracked open. And then, with a sound that wasn't a sound at all, a breaking of time itself, the creature merged with him. Daniel's body jerked, his eyes wide open, his skin tingling with an otherworldly sensation. Every bone in his body cracked. His muscles strained and tore. He could feel the creature inside him. It was part of him now, woven into the very fabric of his being. And for the first time since the moment he entered the apartment, he understood. This place, the whispers, the creature, they were all one. He had always been a part of it. The apartment was only the beginning. The walls that had once felt like prison were now his home. He was one with the darkness, one with the void, an eternal part of the endless whispering. And with a final, horrible clarity, Daniel realized that the world he had known, the life he had lived, it was gone. The last of his humanity bled away, his consciousness swallowed by the hunger of the place. The whispers spoke to him once more, this time in a voice that was no longer his. Asterisk, "You will never leave, Daniel. You are ours now. You always have been." Asterisk. And the darkness consumed him completely. The darkness swallowed him whole, the weight of it pressing down on his soul. There was no light, no sound, only the oppressive silence that stretched on forever. It was as if time itself had stopped, paused in a place where nothing could breathe, nothing could move. Daniel's mind flickered, like a candle guttering in the wind. He could feel fragments of his old self, the fleeting memories of a life that seemed so distant now. A face, a woman's face. His mother? Her voice distant, whispering his name, Daniel, but it was a fading echo, swallowed by the growing void. He couldn't remember who he had been, who he was anymore. All he knew was the darkness, the cold, the hunger. And then it spoke. Not the creature, but something else. Something deeper. A voice that resonated not with sound, but with an endless pulse. A vibration that seemed to come from everywhere. Asterisk, "You are lost now, Daniel." Asterisk. The words wrapped around him like chains, tightening with every beat of his heart. He couldn't speak, couldn't think. Asterisk, "You were always meant to be here." Asterisk. The pulse grew stronger, filling him with a strange, insatiable yearning. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was something deeper. A longing, a whisper, soft and tender, slipped through the void. Join us, Daniel. He felt the pull. An overwhelming urge to surrender. To let the darkness consume him entirely. It promised peace. It promised belonging. His thoughts twisted. Doubts crept in. Was this real? Could he fight this? But the pulse was too strong. The darkness, too vast. You are no longer the person you were, Daniel. The voice was now a part of him. A constant hum beneath his skin. He felt his essence merging with the place, becoming one with it, becoming the whispers, the shadows, the darkness itself. But then, a moment of clarity, a sliver of light, a fleeting image, his badge, his uniform, his duty. He was a cop. He had a job to do. The thought flashed through him like a spark, but it was quickly smothered by the dark tide. Still, the voice faltered. No. No, Daniel. You are here. You will never leave. But for the first time, Daniel fought. A small spark of rebellion. A moment of defiance. I am still me. He thought it, desperately, as if the words could break the spell. The pulse wavered. The darkness shifted, faltering for a heartbeat. And then, a sudden crack, the sound of something breaking. The world around him shuddered. For a split second, Daniel felt something. A tiny fragment of himself, still alive. No. The creature's voice roared. A wave of fury. A torrent of shadow that slammed into him. But Daniel clung to that spark. The faint glimmer of his past.
His identity.
I am not yours, he thought. I will not fade into the dark. For one last desperate moment,
he fought.
And the world around him began to unravel. The darkness trembled, shaking as if it had never been challenged before. The pulse stuttered, flickered, like a heartbeat struggling to survive. Daniel's thoughts were a blur, but he clung to that sliver of himself, the tiny spark of defiance that refused to be swallowed. He could feel the weight of the creature's rage, its cold fingers tightening around his mind. You cannot escape. The voice thundered inside him, but Daniel refused to let it break him. A new sound, a crackling, filled the void. A sound like something breaking, something snapping in the fabric of this place. And then,
a flash.
A brief, blinding light. The world around him warped, shifting like melting glass. For a heartbeat, he felt weightless. The pressure, the darkness, the cold, all faded. He was falling. The void that had consumed him was slipping away, receding as though it was never truly real. The floor, the walls, the pulsing shadows, all vanished in a blur of motion. He couldn't breathe, but somehow he didn't need to. He was breathing. He was alive. And then, the light. Not just a flash, but a surge of warmth, a force. He felt the ground beneath him.
Solid. Real.
He was back. The familiar sting of cold air flooded his lungs. A gasp of reality. The apartment.
The hallway. The door.
He was standing in front of it. The door he had tried to open hours ago. His hand was on the handle, the cold metal biting into his skin. He was free. But as he stood there, fingers trembling, his mind screamed for understanding. The shadows had retreated, but something lingered. A voice,
soft,
whispering in his ear. We're always watching, Daniel. It was a warning, but it didn't come from the apartment. It didn't come from the creature. It came from inside him. His hand, the one gripping the door handle.
I shuddered.
His skin tingled with a strange sensation, like he wasn't entirely in control of his own body. Something was still wrong. Daniel threw the door open, the harsh light of the outside world flooding into the hallway. The scent of fresh air, the hum of distant traffic, they were real. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. He stepped out into the street, his eyes wide, his breath ragged. His heart was still pounding, but it wasn't just the fear. It was the sensation of something inside him, a presence. He stopped in the middle of the street, looking around. The world was moving on, people walking, cars passing by. But he felt like an outsider, like he didn't quite belong. Asterisk, you belong to us now. Asterisk. The whisper returned, clearer than before. The words echoed in his skull, sharp, cutting into his thoughts. Daniel shook his head, his fingers tightening into fists.
No.
He was free. He had escaped. But as he turned to leave the street, he caught his reflection in the window of a nearby store. For the briefest moment, he didn't recognize the face staring back at him. The eyes were hollow, like the darkness had carved them out. His skin was pale, almost translucent. The spark of rebellion, the defiance he had clung to,
Was gone.
in its place, a void. Asterisk, you will return. Asterisk. The whisper came again. And this time, it wasn't just in his mind. It was in the world around him, the very air he breathed. Daniel's legs shook, his body frozen in place. He couldn't escape it. The apartment, the creature, the shadows. He had left the apartment, but the apartment had never truly left him.
It was part of him now.
And as the world continued to turn, he realized the truth. He would always be there, forever. In the dark, the air around Daniel grew thick, like the world was holding its breath. The whispers that had plagued him in the apartment were now an ever-present hum in the back of his mind. Asterisk, you belong to us, Daniel. Asterisk. It was no longer just a whisper. It was a command, a part of his own thoughts. He tried to push it away, tried to take a step forward, but his legs felt heavy, as if they were rooted to the ground. His reflection in the store window flickered. For a moment, it wasn't his face staring back at him. It was something else. The hollow, empty eyes, the twisted grin, the apartment, the darkness, the creature. It was still there, inside him. A shudder ran down his spine. He could feel the presence, the weight of it pressing against him. It was watching, waiting. Asterisk, go back. Asterisk. The command was clear. It wasn't just a voice. It was a compulsion, a pull that he couldn't resist. He staggered back, his body moving against his will, his feet dragging, the weight of the world behind him, his mind screaming for him to turn and run. But the pull was too strong. It was like a hand, cold and iron-tight, gripping his very soul. He looked up. The apartment building loomed before him, impossibly close. Too close. The door he had just escaped from was now an impossibly far distance away. It was as if the entire world had twisted, bent in on itself, forcing him back to where it all began. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the void. His mouth moved, but no words came out. The hallway, the darkness, the creature. He was back. The walls of the building creaked, groaned with hunger, as if they had been waiting for him, patiently. And there, at the end of the hallway, standing in the same spot as before, the creature. Its eyes glowed, a sickly yellow, pulsing like a dying flame. It smiled, its grin wide and distorted, the teeth jagged and sharp. Asterisk, you didn't think you could escape, did you? Asterisk. The voice slithered into his mind, a mix of amusement and dark satisfaction. Daniel took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. His breathing was shallow, erratic. Asterisk, no. This wasn't real. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be, asterisk. But the creature stepped forward, its shape shifting, undulating like liquid darkness. It was no longer just an apparition. It was alive in a way that defied logic. Asterisk, it's not over, Daniel. Asterisk. The creature's voice cut through him, sharp as a blade. And then, it reached for him, its hand extended, long claws gleaming in the dim light, and Daniel's body was forced forward, as if the air itself had pulled him. There was no resisting it now. As its cold fingers wrapped around his wrist, he felt the world slip away again. His body became weightless, and the shadows began to fill his vision. But this time, there was no escape, no light, no hope. Asterisk, you are ours now, Daniel. Asterisk. The voice was everywhere. In his head, in his heart, in the very fabric of his being. And as the darkness closed in around him, he realized he would never leave. Not ever. Not in this life. Not in any life. Daniel was gone. And the apartment, the shadows, had claimed him, body and soul. The weight of the darkness was crushing, overwhelming in its silence. Daniel could feel his thoughts slipping away, as if the very essence of his being was being erased. You're ours, Daniel. The creature's voice whispered again, this time soft, almost tender. It was a sickening comfort, like a lullaby sung by something twisted. His mind screamed, but there was nothing to scream to. No escape, no refuge. He was falling deeper into the void, a place where there were no edges, no boundaries. The creature's presence was like a weight on his chest, its shadow wrapping around him, a constant pressure against his skin. It was inside him now, in the marrow of his bones, in the deepest corners of his soul. We are one now, it breathed, and Daniel could feel it, feel the truth of those words sinking into his very core. He wanted to fight. He wanted to wake up. But there was nothing left to fight with. No strength. No will. Nothing but the pull of the dark, the insistent tug of the place that had claimed him. For a moment, he thought of the world outside. The streets. The sun. The air. But it was all slipping away, like water through his fingers. You cannot escape, the creature murmured, its voice like a caress. Like it knew Daniel's every thought. The feeling of cold fingers wrapped around his wrist, pulling him deeper, further into the shadows, became a part of him. Suddenly, his eyes opened wide, as though a part of his mind had snapped back into place. He could still hear it, the whispers, the murmurs of the other lost souls trapped in the apartment. He could hear their cries, their desperate pleas for release. This place it was full of people like him, people who had walked through the door, never realizing that the door was the last one they'd ever walk through. And they had all changed. They had become part of the apartment, part of the dark force that controlled it. He could feel their presence, a collective mass of lost souls, struggling, aching for freedom they would never know. You'll never be alone again. The creature purred, its voice filling every corner of his mind. And then it pulled him closer, closer to the heart of the apartment. Daniel felt himself being dragged down, his feet no longer touching the ground, as if the floor itself had become liquid. The walls stretched around him, distorting, warping into grotesque shapes that reached for him, grasping for him with unseen hands. Asterisk, welcome home, Daniel. Asterisk. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His mouth was sealed shut, his throat constricted as the darkness closed in around him. And then, he felt it. The apartment. The place. The thing that had been watching, waiting. It was more than just the building. It was the air, the floor, the walls. It was everything. The very fabric of reality in this place had changed, warped, become something else entirely. It was no longer just a place to hide, to trap the lost. It was a living thing, and it had taken root in Daniel, in his very soul. You are part of us now, the voice said, its tone final, absolute. And as the last of his humanity bled away, as his body became nothing but a reflection in the shadows, he realized the horrible truth. There was no leaving. There was no escape. The apartment had claimed him. And now, he was one of them. Forever, the darkness pressed in, wrapping around Daniel like a suffocating blanket. It was no longer a separate entity. It was him, and he was it. The last traces of his humanity were dissolving, his memories unraveling like threads being pulled from a frayed tapestry. He could still feel the remnants of who he was, a cop, a man who had once walked the streets with purpose. But now he was nothing. Nothing but a hollow echo. Welcome home, Daniel, the creature whispered again, its voice thick and warm, like a lullaby sung in the depths of hell. The floor beneath him shifted. The walls warped, curving inward, closing in on him. The hallway, the door, they had all faded away, becoming indistinguishable from the darkness itself. He was in the heart of the apartment now, the very core of it, where the pulse of the place beat through the walls, through his veins. There were others here. He could feel them, not just their presence, but their suffering. They were trapped, like him.
Lost.
Daniel saw flashes. Quick, jagged images. A woman crying, a child reaching out, a man banging his fists against the walls. Each soul, each person, caught in their own private nightmare. They are part of you now. The creature hummed. Asterisk, and you are part of them. Asterisk. Daniel felt it. He felt their pain. It was as if they were woven into his very being, their suffering bleeding into him, and his own pain spilling out, filling the void that had once been him. No, he thought. The word foreign, shaped by a mind that was no longer his. You are one of us. The creature intoned. Asterisk, you always have been. Asterisk. He tried to push it away, tried to claw his way back to who he had been.
But there was no escaping it now.
He could feel the walls closing in on his thoughts, the weight of the apartment's presence smothering him. It was the sound of 1,000 whispers, 1,000 voices, filling every corner of his mind. He couldn't shut them out. There was nowhere to hide. Asterisk, we are all one now. Asterisk. The voice was everywhere. It was no longer just the creature. It was the apartment. It was the place. The pulse of the walls throbbed in time with his heartbeat. The shadowy figures, the lost souls, surrounded him. They were him. And then, in a sudden and unexpected shift, the apartment opened its doors. A crack appeared in the solid wall of darkness. And Daniel, or what was left of him,
saw it. The door.
The exit. It beckoned to him. A promise.
A lie.
Daniel reached out. His hand moved without thought, the familiar motion of trying to escape. His fingers brushed against the edge of the doorframe, and he felt it. The light. A cold, sterile light, flickering at the edge of the world. But as he stepped forward, the world around him pulled. The walls distorted, twisted, like a living thing, stretching and twisting to keep him within. He pulled back, but it was too late. The door slammed shut. The darkness breathed in. The walls sighed in contentment. Asterisk, you cannot leave, Daniel. Asterisk. The voice wasn't just a whisper now. It was the sound of the apartment, the sound of its hunger. And as Daniel's body merged with the void, as his mind was consumed by the eternal pulse, he realized the truth. The apartment had never been a place. It was a reality, a dimension of the lost and the broken. And now, he was one of them, forever. The whispers carried on, louder now, as the walls closed in, the last remnants of his will, of his struggle, vanishing into the endless dark. Asterisk, we are waiting for you. Asterisk. Asterisk, we are always watching. Asterisk. And then, there was nothing, there was no light, no sound, no space, only an endless, suffocating stillness. It felt like drowning, but without the relief of water, just an oppressive weight pressing in from all sides.
Daniel tried to reach out,
tried to move, to grasp onto something, but his limbs were heavy, lifeless. His thoughts were fractured,
broken shards of his past.
But they slipped away the moment he tried to focus on them. His name, his life, the world outside, all faded into nothing. For what felt like an eternity, he was adrift, lost in the void, swallowed by the apartment's hunger. And then, without warning, the pulse began again, slow at first, a rhythmic beat, deep and insistent. It echoed through the darkness, shaking the very fabric of his being. The whispers started, faint at first, like distant voices carried on the wind. Daniel. The voice was soft, almost loving, but it was laced with something darker. He couldn't move,
Couldn't speak.
but he could hear them. He could feel them. The other souls. Asterisk, we never leave. Asterisk. Asterisk, we never forget. Asterisk. Asterisk, we are always watching. Asterisk. The voices grew louder. The darkness pressed in tighter. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open. It wasn't his body anymore. It wasn't his mind. He saw through someone else's eyes. Felt the cold, slick texture of the walls against his skin. He felt the weight of the darkness in his chest. And then it hit him. This wasn't just his end. This was the beginning of something worse. The souls that had been trapped in the apartment, they weren't gone. They were still here, inside him. And now he was the one waiting for the next soul to step through the door. He could see it now. The apartment, in all its twisted, grotesque glory. It wasn't just a place, it was a trap. A living, breathing entity that existed outside time and space. A place where lost souls were consumed, reborn, and forever trapped in an endless cycle. Asterisk, you will be one of us soon, Daniel. Asterisk.
The voice was his own now.
It was no longer just a whisper. It was a command, a promise. He could feel it, the hunger, pulsing through him.
It was his now.
Part of him. And when you're ready, the voice trailed off, growing darker. The door to the apartment opened again. The darkness welcomed him. And Daniel, the man who had once been, was now nothing more than a shadow. A shadow among shadows. A soul among souls. Forever waiting. Forever lost. Forever waiting to claim the next. The door creaked open. Its groan reverberating through the hollow space. Daniel, or what was left of him, felt the pull once again. He could feel the door, its beckoning presence. But now, he wasn't the one being pulled. He was the one waiting. The darkness whispered in his mind, soft, insistent, like a lullaby sung by the void. Asterisk, the next one will come. Asterisk. The words swirled around him, vibrating through his very being. The apartment was patient. It had waited for years. It had swallowed countless souls. And now it was ready for more. Daniel. No, not Daniel anymore. Felt the change. The shift in the air. The door was open. And it called to them. The first sign came in the form of a tremor. A subtle vibration in the walls. Then, a soft footstep echoed down the hallway. Daniel's senses sharpened. He could feel the approach. It was happening again. Asterisk, they always come. Asterisk. The voice was a promise. The voice of the apartment. He couldn't move.
Couldn't speak.
But he could feel. And he knew. He knew the moment the next soul arrived. A figure appeared in the hallway. A woman. Her face was pale. Her eyes wide with uncertainty. She had no idea what awaited her. She hesitated, looking around, as though sensing something was wrong. But the apartment was patient. The walls whispered. The shadows stirred. The woman's hand reached for the door. Asterisk, welcome. Asterisk. The voice purred from the walls. The creature's essence embedded in every corner of the place. She froze. Her fingers hovered just above the handle. But it was too late. The apartment wanted her. It needed her. Daniel could feel it. Feel the hunger surge again. And just like that, she stepped through. Her foot crossed the threshold, and she was pulled in, dragged into the heart of the apartment. The door slammed shut behind her. And, in that moment, Daniel could hear it. The faintest echo of her scream. The shadows whispered. Asterisk, another one for us. Asterisk. Daniel could feel her fear, her struggle, her soul now trapped in the same place he was. And then, it was quiet. The apartment breathed. The walls groaned with satisfaction. Daniel felt the change in the air, the shift in the power. The cycle had begun again. The woman, the new soul, was now a part of them, a part of the apartment. You will become like us. The voice hummed. Asterisk, you will join the waiting. Asterisk. Daniel, or whatever had once been him, felt the pull. The apartment was growing stronger, feeding off the new soul, feeding off its fear.
He was the waiting now.
He was the hunger. And as the walls shifted and groaned, Daniel knew this. The cycle was endless. The apartment was endless. And he was bound to it, forever, waiting for the next one. Because once you stepped through that door, you could never leave. No one ever left. And Daniel would be here. Forever, the darkness shifted, as if alive, breathing in rhythm with the pulse of the apartment. Daniel could feel it. The gnawing emptiness that had once consumed him now fed on the new arrival. The woman. Her fear rippled through the shadows. A feast to the darkness that lived here. You will join us, too. The voice murmured in Daniel's mind, its tone thick and smooth, like honey poured over cold stone. Asterisk, you will never leave. Asterisk. The woman's footsteps echoed down the hallway, weak, stumbling. The apartment's hunger was relentless, pulling at her, dragging her deeper into its grasp. Daniel felt her fear, felt her fight against the pull of the walls, the pressure of the air around her, her chest tight as she realized what she had walked into. But it was too late. The apartment had already claimed her. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices, some frantic, some resigned, but all trapped. Daniel could hear them clearly now. The other souls. They were part of him. Asterisk, join us. Asterisk. A voice whispered from the darkness beside him. Asterisk, don't fight it. Asterisk. It was another soul. A man, perhaps, but his voice was hollow, broken. Daniel's mind flickered, and he realized the souls didn't leave. They just became the apartment, their essence woven into the walls, their memories and pains absorbed into the very fabric of the place. We are waiting for you, the voice breathed again. Asterisk, we were waiting for her. Now we wait for the next. Asterisk. A sharp, cold breath of air swept through the hallway. A faint, shrill cry echoed in the distance. The woman's scream, soft, distant, lost to the walls. The darkness seemed to savor it. Every pulse, every flicker, was an expression of the apartment's hunger, growing stronger with each soul that entered, each soul that was consumed. Daniel tried to fight it, tried to remember who he had been, where he had come from, but the whispers drowned out his thoughts. Asterisk, you belong here now. Asterisk. Asterisk, you are one with the darkness. Asterisk. The walls shifted, like they were breathing, expanding and contracting with each beat of the apartment's heart. The place was alive. It wasn't just walls. It wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing entity. And Daniel was a part of it. He could feel the souls around him, their presence tugging at him, pulling him deeper into the heart of the place. The woman's presence was now part of the pulse. Her fear, her pain, mingling with his own. She's one of us now. A voice whispered. Asterisk, she will wait, just like you. Asterisk. Daniel wanted to scream, wanted to fight back. But his voice, like his body, was lost in the dark. He felt the floor beneath him melt, and the walls close in tighter, warping his sense of self. The apartment, the darkness. It was him now. No escape. No end. Only the waiting for the next soul. And when the door opened again, as it inevitably would, there would be another lost soul, foolish enough to step into the trap. And the cycle would continue. Forever. The apartment would never be empty. Not as long as there were souls to take. Daniel was part of it. He was a part of the waiting, the hunger, and he would wait. Forever. The air thickened, a heavy, suffocating fog that clung to the walls, to the floors. The apartment, alive in its darkness, pulsed in rhythm with the rhythm of souls trapped within it. Daniel, no, what was left of him, felt the shift in the air again. A presence. A new arrival. The door. The door opened. Another soul stepped in. A man this time. Worn, tired. His eyes flickered around the hallway as if sensing something was wrong, but not knowing how or why. The air seemed to pull at him. The apartment was waiting. Daniel felt the man's confusion, his hesitation, and then the realization. Slow, creeping in like a tide. The man's gaze landed on the walls, on the shadows. And that's when he knew. But it was too late. The apartment had already wrapped its tendrils around him. Asterisk, welcome home. Asterisk. The voice was not just the creature now. Not just the apartment. It was all of them. The lost souls. The essence of the place itself. The man's body stiffened, his mind trapped between the instinct to run and the realization that he had nowhere to go. The walls pressed closer, the dark corner of the apartment stretching out toward him. You will never leave. The voices whispered, and with a single step, the man crossed the threshold, surrendering to the void. His footfalls echoed faintly as he entered, his heart pounding, but the sound was swallowed up quickly. Silence returned. Daniel could feel the shift again, the power of the place growing stronger, more insistent. The walls seemed to breathe with anticipation. Another one. Another soul for the collection. They always come. A voice sighed. Asterisk, always drawn to the door. Asterisk. Daniel could feel the apartment's hunger. It was full, and yet it was empty, always needing more. He wasn't alone. The others, the other souls, they were waiting too. Each one, once a man or woman, now just a part of the pulse. The presence, the apartment itself. Asterisk, you are all part of the cycle now. Asterisk. The voice was both distant and close, echoing through the corridors of his mind. The dark place seemed to close in on him tighter.
He was the apartment now.
The new arrival's presence flitted.
Faint.
A whisper in the air, fading in the shadows. We have all been waiting. Another voice whispered, its tone heavy with eternity. Asterisk, for you? Asterisk. Daniel no longer knew who he was. He had become the waiting, the hunger, the cycle. The door would always open. The souls would always come. They would never escape. The apartment would always claim them. The walls sighed again. A sound like a breath drawn too deep. Daniel felt it in his bones, in the marrow of his very being. The cycle had begun again. The new arrival was lost. His soul, now woven into the apartment, just like all the others. But there was something different, something subtle. The apartment seemed to linger, its presence thicker than before, almost watching. Daniel, now a part of it, felt an unnatural shift in the air, a disturbance, a crack, a fracture. The voices around him grew louder, their whispers tangled together, more frantic, more desperate. Asterisk, where is it? Asterisk, asterisk, where is it coming from? Asterisk. A low rumble echoed through the dark, like thunder far off, but there was no sky here, no rain, just the relentless grip of the apartment. Daniel could feel the others, the lost souls. They were stirring. The apartment, once a place of suffocating stillness, was changing. Something is different. A voice murmured, a familiar voice. One Daniel had never quite recognized. But he knew it now. It was one of the souls. Perhaps the first one. The first to have entered. The first to have joined the pulse. A groan echoed through the walls. An unnatural, tortured sound, as if the very building itself were in pain. Asterisk, it's awake. Asterisk. The voice breathed, its tone thick with fear. Asterisk, the apartment, it's awake. Asterisk. Daniel could feel it. A slow, crawling awareness spreading through the darkness. Something was shifting. Something beneath the walls. Beneath the floorboards. Something ancient. The apartment wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a trap. It was alive. And it had been waiting. Waiting for something. Asterisk, what's happening? Asterisk. Another voice, sharp, frantic, broke through the quiet. Asterisk. Why does it feel like it's pulling us in deeper? Asterisk. Daniel's senses sharpened. He felt it too, the tug, the pull of the walls, the hunger deep inside the place. The apartment's pulse was quickening, growing faster, more violent. We need to get out. Another soul cried, but the words were hollow, drowned by the overwhelming presence of the apartment.
The door.
Daniel could feel it. The door was calling, its faint hum echoing through the void. The place was alive again. The hunger was stronger. But there was no escape. There's no way out. The voice, the first soul, whispered. Its tone almost sad. Asterisk, it knows what we are. Asterisk, the air thickened. A shift in the atmosphere. A pressure, like a storm rolling in. The walls creaked again. But this time, the sound wasn't the normal groaning of wood and stone. This was different. The shadows twisted. The dark began to move. The apartment had always been a trap.
But now,
it was becoming something more. Daniel could feel the darkness. Its form. Its purpose. It was reaching out. It was no longer just waiting for the next soul. It was searching. Hunting. We're in it now. The familiar voice murmured again. Quieter this time. As if the apartment itself were listening. Asterisk, there's no going back. Asterisk. Daniel felt the shift as it opened. The walls stretched, warped in on themselves. And then, a sudden rush. A surge of energy flooded the place. The darkness rose up. The air crackled with static. The sensation of something unseen, alive, drawing closer. It wasn't just hunger anymore. It was power. The apartment wasn't simply waiting for the next soul. It had become something else. Something vast. Daniel could hear it. The sound of the walls breathing. The hum of its pulse. And then, he heard it. A sound like a scream. Piercing, agonizing. It wasn't from the souls. It was from the apartment itself. The darkness began to crack. The walls shifted, warped. And something new, something older, began to seep through. The apartment had always been a trap.
But now,
it was a door. A door to something far worse. The air trembled, heavy, with an ancient power. Daniel felt it pulse, like a heartbeat, steady and cold, as if the very apartment were awakening to something deeper, darker. The shadows grew, elongated, stretching beyond reason, as if they could reach into realms that defied understanding. The walls, once just a barrier, were no longer static. They were shifting, breathing,
alive.
Daniel's mind screamed to wake up, to fight. But there was no escape from this. He was already too far gone. He was the waiting, the hunger. He was the pulse now. The familiar voice. The first soul to have entered. Whispered again. Asterisk, do you feel it? Asterisk. It was a question, but not really. The voice was tremulous, laced with a fear that echoed deep inside the walls. Asterisk, it's waking up. It's calling. Asterisk. The apartment wasn't just a trap, a place for souls to be devoured. It was something else. Something ancient. The walls cracked. Not just the sound of age or neglect, but a deep, primal tear. Something was breaking. A barrier. A threshold. And then, a sharp, piercing wail split the air. The kind of cry that comes from the very bowels of the earth. A sound that could tear sanity apart. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way they understood life. It was something older. Something that had slumbered for centuries. Locked in the deepest core of the apartment, waiting for the perfect moment to awaken. Asterisk, it's here. Asterisk. The voice trembled. Asterisk, we are all here now. Asterisk. Daniel felt it. Felt the presence. The thing inside the apartment. The entity that had always been there, but had stayed hidden, silent, until now. It was searching. It was calling. And it was growing. The apartment, once a mere prison for lost souls, had become the vessel for something greater. Something more terrifying. The walls began to bend, to twist into impossible shapes. The very structure of the building was warping. The dark corners of the hallways seemed to stretch, as though they were trying to reach beyond their confines, beyond the apartment itself. Asterisk, what is it? Asterisk. Daniel's mind screamed, but his thoughts were thin, fragile. The other souls were fading too. Their presence was becoming overwhelmed by the growing force. And then, through the shifting walls, through the cracks that had begun to bleed, a figure emerged. It was a shadow, but not a shadow as they knew it. It was an existence, a presence that filled the entire space, a thing of pure, unnameable darkness, stretching, reaching, consuming everything it touched. It had no form, no shape. It was the absence itself, a living void. And it grew. Daniel's heart raced, pounding against the walls of his mind. The pulse of the apartment quickened. And in that moment, he understood. The apartment had always been a doorway, a place between worlds, a space where the living could be trapped, but also where the dead could slip through, and something darker could cross over. The thing that had been waiting, the one that had slumbered for so long, was waking, and it was no longer content with the souls trapped in its walls. It was coming for more. The darkness rose higher, pressing down on everything, squeezing the air from Daniel's lungs. The walls began to twist in impossible ways, as if the apartment itself was folding into itself, a maze of corridors that led to nowhere, a doorway to the dark world beyond. Asterisk, it's pulling us all in. Asterisk. A voice trembled, but it was too late. The air crackled with energy. And then, the doorway that had always been a symbol of escape, was no longer a way out. It was the final seal. And as the entity emerged fully, its form stretching across the entire apartment, Daniel understood. The apartment was no longer just a prison. It was a portal to something beyond death, something beyond existence. And now, it was open. The cycle had shifted, and there was no turning back. The very fabric of the apartment quivered, as if it, too, were struggling to contain the thing that had emerged. The walls shook violently, splintering under the pressure of a force that was not of this world. Daniel could feel it, the presence of the thing that was no longer just a shadow, but an invasion. It was everywhere, in the air, in the walls, in the very marrow of his being. The apartment, once a thing of hunger, a mere trap for lost souls, had become a breeding ground for something worse, something older, a darkness that couldn't be measured by any human understanding. The voices, the souls, they were silent now, drowned in the overwhelming weight of what had entered. Daniel could feel them, felt them fading, as if they were being erased by the presence, swallowed by the dark thing that now ruled the place. They were no longer waiting. They were simply gone. It was just him now, just Daniel, and the entity that filled every inch of the apartment. Asterisk, do you see it? Asterisk. The voice, the first soul, the one who had whispered to him before, spoke, but it was a faraway, hollow echo, fading faster, like a voice swallowed by the void. Asterisk, it's here. Asterisk. It wasn't a statement. It was a realization, a final understanding. The thing that had waited, the thing that had called, was not something that could be fought, not something that could be reasoned with. It was the end. Daniel felt his chest tighten, a crushing weight pressing in on him from all sides. The apartment had become something alive, and now it was collapsing in on itself, folding the space, warping the laws of time and reality. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they no longer made sense. The apartment was bleeding, its edges fraying, its form distorting into an unrecognizable mass. The dark thing, now fully emerged, no longer took a shape that could be called human. It was an endless shadow, a presence so vast it seemed to stretch into the very fabric of the universe. Asterisk, we are no longer just trapped. Asterisk, the voice, once familiar, faded completely, lost in the terror of what was now coming. Daniel understood. The entity had awakened. It wasn't just consuming souls anymore. It was destroying what was real. It was breaking down the walls between the living and the dead. He could feel the temperature drop. The air grew thick, almost gelatinous. The darkness pressed against him, a weight that seeped into his skin, into his very soul. The apartment had become a gate, and the thing that had crossed over was pulling him, pulling everything into it. There was no escape. There was no going back. The thing was unstoppable. And just as the darkness closed in, there was a sound, a shift in the air, a flicker, a momentary pause in the overwhelming weight of the presence.
The door.
The door. The same door that had opened, for every soul before, was glowing, not with light, but with darkness. A swirling, inky blackness that pulsed with its own life, its own hunger. It beckoned. And as the presence pushed forward, as the walls began to buckle under the pressure, Daniel felt his body move, unwillingly,
Toward the door.
it was the only thing left. The only thing that could offer.
What?
He didn't know. His feet carried him forward, toward the glowing door, toward the last possible escape. And, in that moment, the apartment seemed to scream. The sound wasn't just a noise. It was a roar, a wail of agony, the very soul of the building in torment, as though it knew what was about to happen. The door was a trap, but it was also freedom. Daniel stepped into it. And then, nothing. The apartment, the entity, everything, collapsed into the void. The cycle, the waiting, the hunger, had ended. Or had it? The void stretched out before Daniel, an endless sea of blackness. He could feel it, the weight of nothingness, a crushing silence that echoed through the vast emptiness. There was no sound, no light, just the oppressive sensation of being nowhere. His breath came fast, shallow, as if the very air had been sucked out of existence. He was floating, but not really. There was no up, no down, only the sensation of being, of simply existing in a space that held nothing but its own consuming absence. Daniel tried to move, but it was futile. There was no ground beneath him, no point of reference. It was like being trapped in a dreamless sleep. And then, there was a flicker, a light. It wasn't bright, not like the sun. It was cold, a sickly blue hue that flickered like a dying flame. The light pulsed, faint, distant, like a heartbeat. And then,
He saw it. The door.
it stood there, hanging in the middle of the void, its frame glowing with that same inky darkness. It was different now. The door wasn't just a doorway anymore. It was a part of this place, this endless, black abyss. It called to him, but it was no longer the simple beckoning of the apartment. It was more than that. It was alive. The door seemed to shift, to twist in ways that made no sense. The shadows around it twisted and squirmed, the walls, or what used to be walls, writhing in agony. Daniel's mind screamed. The door was a trap. It had always been a trap. But what if this was the way out? What if, this time, there was no hunger waiting for him on the other side? He had no choice. He moved toward it. The pull was almost magnetic. Each step felt like it wasn't his own. He could feel his body reacting,
Compelled.
as if the very essence of the door was drawing him forward. The closer he got, the more it felt wrong. The air was thick, heavier than it should be, pressing against his skin. And then, the voice. It was faint at first, a whisper, but it grew louder, clearer. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come back. Asterisk. Daniel froze. The voice was his.
No.
Not his. It was the other. The apartment. The darkness itself speaking through him. He remembered. It was the thing that had crossed over. The entity that had filled the apartment. The hunger that had consumed everything. It had found a new vessel. A new way to exist. This is it. The voice purred. Low and twisted. Like an ancient serpent slithering through his thoughts. Asterisk. This is where it all begins again. Asterisk. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The door, the doorway, was a trap. The apartment wasn't gone. It hadn't been destroyed. It had shifted, changed, and now, it was here, in this void, waiting for the next soul. Daniel's stomach churned.
He was part of it now.
The cycle would never end. The darkness had found him, had become him, and now, he was the one waiting. The door stood open before him, but it wasn't freedom. It was the next phase of the hunt. Daniel stepped through, and the void swallowed him whole. There was no end, no escape, just the endless pull of the door, the hunger, and the waiting. Daniel's breath came in short, frantic bursts as he stared at the door. The cold light flickered, casting long shadows that twisted unnaturally around its frame. The air grew thick again, suffocating, as if the very space around him was alive, pulling, pressing, demanding his attention. He could feel the weight of it. The thing, moving beneath the surface of his thoughts, watching, waiting. The apartment had always been a trap, but this was something else. Something far darker, far more insidious. The very air was saturated with its presence, and as the door loomed before him, Daniel realized it wasn't just a doorway. It was a portal. A shiver ran down his spine, but his legs, his body, they were not his own. Every muscle, every bone felt heavy with the pull of the door, as if it had already claimed him. His mind screamed for him to turn away, to not take that step, but his feet moved as though possessed. "Don't go through," the warning echoed, distant and faint, like a memory too old to recall. But it was too late. The door seemed to stretch as he drew closer, growing larger with each step. He could almost hear the faint whispers, the voices of those who had crossed before him, their cries now nothing more than a murmur in the darkness. They were gone, absorbed, consumed, like the very fabric of the apartment had devoured their souls. Daniel's heart pounded as he reached for the door, his hand trembling. His palm brushed against the cold, slick wood. The door was alive, pulsing with dark energy. And as his fingers made contact, a wave of pure terror washed over him, paralyzing him in place. Suddenly, the door opened. It was not an ordinary opening. No creak, no slow swing. It simply folded open, as if the darkness itself was eager to spill out. He could see it now beyond the door. Not a room, not an escape, but a vast, yawning void. A place where time didn't exist. The thing behind the door was waiting. And with a sickening lurch, Daniel stepped through. The door slammed shut behind him. There was no longer a world, no longer an apartment. Only the darkness. Only the void. And the waiting, the void stretched out before Daniel, an endless sea of black, swallowing every inch of his being. His body felt weightless, suspended in the infinite dark, but there was no sense of peace, no release. The air, thick with emptiness, pressed against him like an oppressive force. There was no sound, no echo of his own thoughts, only the cold, suffocating silence that filled the space. It was as if he had crossed into a place outside of time, outside of reason. He had passed through the door, yes, but the door had not led to freedom. It had not led to an escape. It had only brought him deeper into the cycle, into the endless hunger of the place that had once been an apartment, but now it was something more. Something alive. Daniel's senses swirled in the void. His mind was hazy, disjointed. He could feel the pull of the dark thing that had claimed the apartment, the entity, lingering on the edges of his awareness, its hunger never fully sated. He couldn't see it, not clearly, but he could feel it watching, waiting. And in that moment, Daniel realized what he had become. He wasn't just trapped anymore. He wasn't just a victim. He was a part of it. A part of the thing that had once been the apartment. The cycle had swallowed him whole, and now he was both the hunter and the hunted. For a long time there was nothing, only the oppressive silence and the sensation of floating, of being stretched thin across the fabric of this strange, dark world. But then something shifted. A faint light appeared, far in the distance. It was not bright, just a dim, flickering pulse of blue. And as Daniel gazed at it, something inside him stirred. It was as if the light was calling him, beckoning him forward. It felt familiar, like something from his past, something before the apartment, before the darkness. But as he started to move toward it, a thought, an instinct, stopped him cold.
No.
The light was another illusion, another trap. The apartment, the void, the thing beyond the door, it was all part of the same cycle. He had been consumed, transformed into its hunger, its pulse. He would never escape.
Not now.
And so, Daniel waited. The darkness was his home now, his prison, his eternity. The door had closed behind him, and there was no going back.